Hey everybody, Ian here. So, welcome back to my channel. Sorry it's been like a million years, except also I'm not sorry. But so today I want to talk about two shows that I enjoy, The Simpsons and Bob's Burgers. Two similar cartoons, similar in premise. They both have the family with the three kids, etc. But I really want to talk about the differences between the two shows, particularly the difference in approach that the two shows take starting around 10 years into the run. But so you may be wondering right now, Ian, you're so brave and smart and beautiful and thin and handsome and funny, but what do The Simpsons and Bob's Burgers have to do with the numbers 9 through 11? Well, the short answer is that I'm going to talk about seasons 9 through 11 of the two shows. After season 9 of The Simpsons is where a lot of fans lose interest in the show and actually become very angry about it. And there really is a major shift in the show's tone at that 10-year point. While Bob's Burgers, on the other hand, I think it stays more true to the original incarnation of itself. And in all fairness, Bob's Burgers started way later than The Simpsons and a lot of other older adult cartoons. It had this extra 20 years of hindsight, lots of time to observe the pitfalls to avoid and stuff like that. But if you've been following me for a while, you may remember that I did a video on The Simpsons back in October of 2020. I had fun making it, but I don't really recommend it. I don't think I'm even going to put a link to it because it's literally 90 minutes long. And it's just me laughing at all my favorite clips, which was fun. And I was talking about the writing of the show because I want to be a writer, but I look back and groan, oh my gosh. But I was new in LA at the time, and I didn't really have friends or a job or this crazy little thing called a life. And I was moving around a lot, and the pandemic was 6 months old, and Donald Trump was still president. And so I consider myself to have been in the middle of a manic state when I made that video. So I don't recommend it, to put it nicely. But so, what did The Simpsons do so well? In short, it was very finely tuned, especially during kind of the middle of those first 10 years, seasons kind of 5, 6, and 7. They would really go over the scripts again and again and again, way more than is typical, and it ran so smoothly. And it's kind of similar to a rock that's been, smoothed over by ocean waves. There were very few ridges in it, and a smooth rock and a smooth script are both results of going back over it again and again. But there's also this there's a really good balance of characters versus situations in the early episodes of The Simpsons. It's kind of a yin yang moment. There's always this wacky stuff happening. That was always part of the show, but it would usually be balanced out in some way. It would either be happening in just someone's imagination. They would just be picturing this crazy thing in a thought bubble, or one character is experiencing this crazy thing while all the others remain in a normal situation, or it would just be a crazy version of something normal and had one foot on the ground. And in the best years of that show, no matter the situation, it was always about the characters themselves, not the crazy place that they're in. But it also had a really good structure to each episode. This is the writing stuff. It was very cohesive, and it's all very self-contained, and it was also always a fun just story to unfold, because one thing they would do, I learned this in Simpsons DVD commentary a couple years ago, but Act 1 of 3, Act 1 would always be totally unrelated to the actual plot, and then at the end of Act 1, beginning of Act 2, that's when they just kind of pass this baton. And it just really seamlessly transitions into the actual point of the episode. And it's jam-packed full of not just story, but jokes. Oh my gosh, it's so funny. And when I talk about, story structure and story flow and stuff like that, I don't expect casual viewers to care about anything like that. But they are important frameworks that just piles together to allow it to be very funny. It's so funny. I would say that seasons 3 through 9 of The Simpsons are the best years. There's kind of apparently there's always debate about it. I actually think of seasons 3 through 9 as being kind of like a triangle. Like seasons 3 and 9 are kind of on the outside, and seasons like 4 and 8 are like better than that, and seasons 5 and 7 are even better than that, and then season 6, right at my nose, is just like perfect. It's just this like perfect balance of, whatever. All that crap I'm talking about that you don't care about. You guys aren't even watching anymore. Don't lie to me. But anyway, it's able to do all this stuff and be so funny just because of how well made it is. And it's the show I watched while I was learning how to write, and so I've always had kind of a special place for it in my heart. But Bob's Burgers is also a very good show, and it's very down to earth and very funny consistently. And what it does so well is some of the stuff that The Simpsons did very well in these early years. There's a lot of focus on characters and on story. And it's also a word I use for it is dynamic. The plots are very dynamic. Especially in the earliest years, there's this cast of really consistent side characters who are always doing their own thing. And so there's lots of moving parts in every episode, every scene. There's like 5 or 6 different conversations going on that bounce off each other really well, and there's always funny music and really funny directing. Like someone will come in and say something really boring, like, oh, I just bought my pencils today, and there will be this really quick like and then just go back to normal, and it's just very silly. It's always very enjoyable. And any show will falter at some point. It's normal to hear people say, like, oh, I prefer the early years better. Same with music, I think, and just kind of anything. And I think that Bob's Burgers' newest episodes aren't up there with some of the classics, but they're still very enjoyable and dependable. And even though it's much less chaotic than it used to be, that kind of dramatic music and that those quick, silly zooms I was talking about, those don't happen as much anymore. But I think they were really dedicated to not falling into that trap that The Simpsons fell into around season 9 or 10, when you really have to start thinking about putting characters into new situations, and so you can get kind of a new impact out of them. The Simpsons took that way too far and just kind of, I think, really lost focus. That perfectly segues into my next tab, which is asking what changed with The Simpsons. A lot of Simpsons fans will argue very intensely that it just gets like horrible, but I disagree. I definitely prefer the stuff before season 9, but season 10 onward is honestly fine. It's not worth going on and on about. I think it becomes less special of a show. But I also think that Simpsons fans are spoiled by how good the early seasons of that show are. That golden period. I consider it to be seasons 3 through 9. Some people say, 4 through 8, 2 10. It's debatable. Except it's not, because I'm right. But I really think that at that kind of 9 and 10 year mark, the show just loses focus. It really shifts away from dialogue driven jokes to like antic driven jokes, and it moves away from like the characters saying crazy things in the direction of crazy things happening to the characters, and it suddenly always opts to have a car chase and fights breaking out and riots and stuff, and there had always been explosions and riots and just the town going, it just collapsing into hell, but those had usually been, they would be kind of on the way to something else happening, not the point of the entire scene. But anyway, I want to give you one example of what I'm talking about. I'm going to do the exact opposite of what I did last time, which was just 90 minutes of clips. I'm going to show you these 2 clips that I think do a really good job of highlighting what changed in The Simpsons. And they're 2 very similar clips. One of them is from season 6, my favorite season, and one of them is from season 9, this kind of transition year where it's still funny, but it is tonally very different. And both of these scenes feature a really weird joke involving Homer's body, and both jokes actually make me very uncomfortable. I'm not really a fan of either joke, but they have different impacts, and I walk away from each of those scenes feeling something different. And so I'm going to show you these 2 similar clips and then explain what makes them different. So this is this clip from season 6 where they are hosting the judge of a film festival. They're having him over for dinner. Bon appetit.
Homer, the guest should get the last pork chop.
But I'm still hungry.
Okay, so like I said, that's just this. It's this really weird thing that it makes me kind of uncomfortable as a viewer. It's not a scene that really makes me laugh that hard, but I am using it to compare to something, just a very similar thing they do in a season 9 episode where there's not much has happened yet. The episode hasn't gotten going.
Wow, McBain is really buffed up. You could grate cheese on those abs.
Yeah, but can he do this?
So, yeah, that's the season 9 clip. Now, what I want to say about these two clips, again, they're just very weird and very similar. But the thing about the season 6 one, where the two bellies are like barking at each other, as soon as this little weird bit with the bellies is done, they move on to the actual point, which is not relevant to this video. But in the season 9 episode, the one where his belly crushes the soda can, that's literally the end of the scene. That's the whole point of that scene. And it really feels like when they were making that episode, they like walked into the writing of this episode and said, okay, how can we get Homer's belly to do something really weird? Rather than saying, okay, how do we have Homer and this guy, kind of butting heads with each other over and over and over again in all these different ways? And so rather than the season 6 episode where this weird Homer belly thing is like a pit stop on the way to the actual point of the scene, in the season 9 one, it's just the point of the scene. The thing I always say is that the show gets totally different because it gets tonally different. And so season 9 really was a big shift in tone for the show, but it still stayed funny. But I think that for The Simpsons, some of the cracks kind of start to appear during season 8. But season 8 also has some of like the top like 5 best episodes of the show. But some of the weaker ones, I think, are some of the weakest of those early years. And then in season 9, this is when they really start making an effort to produce new situations and new scenarios in every single episode. And it just, again, it gets totally different because it gets tonally different. But also, another thing I noticed, this was after I really became a writer and was paying attention to not just, jokes and dialogue, but the setup of an episode. I noticed that during season 9, and there aren't cracks that start to appear in season 8. It's during season 9. They get in the habit of they'll like back themselves into a corner, and then they just use this quick, huge joke at the very end to make it all go away. Because it has to in a show like this where it kind of has to go back to normal by the end of the episode. But they'll be running through this episode all the way to the very end as though they still have like 5 or 6 minutes left, as though there's still like 5 or 6 pages of the script left. And then all of a sudden, literally in the last 30 seconds, the last half of the last page, suddenly there's just this one huge thing that just undoes everything, rather than spending several pages winding it down to a natural conclusion. And that's during season 9. Like I said, this hinge season. Or I don't think I said that. Like I was thinking and have now said, this hinge season. But so season 10 is when the show just completely changes. And it's like season 9 done less smoothly. 9 had this change of focus, but I think it still had the pacing of the previous seasons. And so it goes from being an extraordinary show to being an ordinary show. Not, oh my gosh, seriously, some Simpsons fans are like, they say it's like the worst show ever after season like 10, and that's not true. And there are still funny episodes in season 10, and even funny moments within the lesser episodes. But again, the show is just totally different because it's tonally different. And that's, season 9 and 10. By the time you get to season 12, it's nothing like it used to be. It's like a different show starring the same people. But so Bob's Burgers, on the other hand, if you look at Bob's Burgers season 12, there's an episode where Gene is in a friend's music video. And it's actually all about just Gene learning to be a friend. And so even though he's in this music video and in these kinds of new scenarios, again, it's a character episode about Gene, again, learning to be a friend. And if the Simpsons were to do something like this, they would just take it way too far. And they would have outrageous plot lines and just these huge, trendy guest star names that all lead it to feel more hollow. And they would focus on plots instead of characters. And the reason I say this is because they did that. There's an episode where Bart and several of his friends, in season 12 of The Simpsons, they join a boy band, because this was made in like the year 2000, and so boy bands were huge. And lo and behold, NSYNC just happens to stop by Springfield and give them a little bit of advice because reasons. And so I think the middle ground might be kind of there's an episode of South Park where they join a boy band, and it's more than just the Bob's Burgers one, but it's way less than the Simpsons one. They do find success, but it's only kind of like touring malls, and they don't really break it, make it big. Anyway, that's not so important. I think The Simpsons had an advantage and kind of a disadvantage of airing first. There's actually an episode of South Park called The Simpsons Did It, where a character keeps trying to find new things to do and is reminded that, oh, The Simpsons already had this idea. They made this episode 10 years ago. At the same time, though, The Simpsons, it also had to tread new ground, and it had to walk, the road not traveled. And so later shows had the benefit of seeing how The Simpsons lost focus around that season 9, season 10 mark, which in any show is when you're really going to have to make an effort to come up with new ideas and new situations. And again, like I said, I think The Simpsons just took it too far and just lost focus. That being said, I don't want to just be a hater for the sake of being a hater. I think that's obnoxious. And something I really appreciate about modern Simpsons is the return to storytelling. I realize that sounds very douchey. I apologize. But they stop ending episodes with just this big random joke. They start really making a concerted effort to wind the story down, starting about, with 3 or 4 minutes left, 3 or 4 pages of the script left, rather than just having, again, in like the last half of the last page, just suddenly this huge out of nowhere thing that's called a deus ex machina. It basically means machine from God. It's when God just hands you this plot device that you just use, no work involved. And it's just, it's kind of sloppy, and I really appreciate that The Simpsons, I think these are a group of writers, and they notice a trend in their writing, and they have made a really concerted effort to return to storytelling, which I appreciate a lot. I think that some of the chaos of those early years is not there right now, but that's fine, because the structure really, really matters, and framework really, really matters. And chaos and craziness alone is not as good as structured, framed chaos. And so, in conclusion, The Simpsons really just loses focus, and writing really matters. And I would actually love to work on The Simpsons someday. It really is my favorite show, and the early years of that show had a huge impact on my writing. I think I talk about that in more detail in my other Simpsons video, which again, I do not recommend, and I will not be posting the link to it. But if you want, you can go find it. But I'm not going to go into the details of how I write. I don't think that's very interesting, but I do think about The Simpsons a lot. And like I said, I do care about crafting a good ending to something, and I think it can be really frustrating when something just suddenly stops in the middle of